Good evening again. This is Andrew Skirka, and in this short segment, I'm going to answer some of the frequently asked questions that I receive during my question and answer segments, which we usually do after my live presentations. But there is some informative information in these slides, so I figured that since I have them, I might as well put them out there as well. During my presentation, I don't talk a lot about the gear that I pack. There are some mentions to it, and people kind of get the idea since they see me walking in a lot of these photos with this tiny little backpack. So kind of inevitably during the Q&A segment, people ask me, what do I pack and why do I go so light? I first started backpacking in the Appalachian Trail, or first started backpacking rather, in 2002 when I did the Appalachian Trail, and that was my first long distance hiking experience. I had never done really any backpacking before that either, just car camping or maybe an overnight with some friends or working at Camp Carolina. But the long distance hiking experience is very different. And if you just go out for the weekend, for example, it doesn't matter whether you cover 5 miles or whether you cover 50 miles. But on a long distance hike, it matters every single day how many miles you cover. And it also matters how enjoyable those miles are to hike. And what I found on the very first day of my Appalachian Trail experience was that there was this inverse relationship between pack weight and the amount of fun that I was having. Namely, the more weight that I carried, the less fun I was having. And if I started taking things out of my pack and making my pack lighter, that I was starting to enjoy myself a lot more. And that reason, this fun factor, is the biggest reason why I practice lightweight backpacking or ultralight backpacking. Sure, it's as this graphic explains, as your weight goes down, it is more comfortable. You can hike faster. You are more nimble and more mobile. Your safety increases, and on the other end, you're not as exposed to all the stresses of a heavy pack on your muscles or on your joints. You are less likely to get injuries, be they overuse injuries like stress fractures or blisters, and your environmental impact goes down as well because you're just not consuming or buying a bunch of junk because you're not carrying it with you. So there are no lanterns. You aren't carrying extra sets of clothing, etc. And your environmental footprint when you're actually out there is smaller as well. You don't have the spread of gear when you get into a campsite, and you also don't put as much pressure on sensitive ground like alpine plants if you're walking with a lighter weight pack. The shelter and sleeping system that I used during the Great Western Loop consisted of, namely of, I guess, 4 parts. First, there was the shelter itself. I was using a 9-ounce A-frame tarp. It was a modified version of the Go Light Layer, which is no longer in production. And the reason that I like tarps is because they ventilate much better than tents. They're much lighter weight. They provide far more room for their weight. And the one issue with tarps typically is that they don't offer you any protection from wind, particularly if you don't have a fully protective tarp, which I don't. They also don't provide you protection from creepy crawlies, from bugs, from rain splatter, spindrift. So that's where the bivy sack comes in. The bivy sack that I used was a model from Bozeman Mountain Works. Currently, though, I'm using a model from Mountain Laurel Designs, and I'd recommend either model. The bivy sack is a waterproof bottom, usually a silicone impregnated floor or nylon floor, and then it has a water resistant nylon top. And the idea is that I can't be out in this bivy in a rainstorm and stay dry. That's not going to happen. But it will protect me from all the things that tarps don't protect me from. So creepy crawlies, dirt, bugs, spindrift, rain splatter. Underneath my bivy sack, I would have a 3.5-ounce closed cell foam pad. Specifically, it's the Nightlight pad from Gossamer Gear. It would be only torso length because underneath my feet I would usually put my backpack, and then that would provide me the extra cushion that I needed for the lower portion of my body. I think it's not only important what you're bringing to sleep on, but also what nature is providing you to sleep on in terms of your comfort. So if you were to take, say, a 1.5-inch thick thermarest self-inflatable full-length pad and sleep on a concrete floor, you're probably not going to be that comfortable. But I could take my closed cell foam torso-length pad and my backpack and sleep on this nice cushy bed of pine needles or Pacific Northwest moss and be extremely comfortable because nature was supplementing the the cushioning that I didn't bring with me. The last component in my shelter and sleeping system was a 19-ounce Go-Lite quilt. I believe it's the Go-Lite Ultra. And the reason that I like quilts is because they're much more versatile than your traditional mummy bag. Specifically, they're versatile in the sense that I'm not as fully enclosed in it as a mummy. So if it's, say, 15 degrees out, which is a temperature that I saw, and then I could really curl up in that quilt and tug it and tighten it up around me. Or if it's 50 degrees out, which is another temperature that I saw, I could loosely drape the quilt over me and maybe kind of pull it down a little bit off of my shoulders. And in both of those environments, I'm perfectly comfortable. The quilt, by not having a bottom, basically no fabric, say from like your butt up to your shoulders, that also saves a lot of weight as opposed to a traditional mummy. In most quilts there are foot boxes, and that's very critical because that definitely provides some extra warmth that you want. The stove that I used was a model that I made out of a Fancy Feast cat can. It weighs 0.3 of an ounce, and it burns denatured alcohol, which you can get in the paint department of any hardware store. You can also find denatured alcohol or the chemical variant of it as heat, which is used to de-ice gas lines during the winter, so you can get it at most gas stations. And because the fuel is extremely cheap and very accessible or readily available, it's very popular with long distance hikers because it's much harder to find white gas and even harder to find those canisters for stoves like a Jetboil or a Pocket Rocket. I store the fuel in an 8-ounce Dasani bottle, and I'll typically use about 6 or 7/10 of an ounce to boil 1.5 to 2 cups of water. So do the math, however many days you would need. My own setup is a 0.9 liter Evernew titanium pot without the nonstick coating. It weighs roughly 3.5 ounces with the lid. And in that lower right photo, you can see how nicely the flame curls up around the bottom of that pot. If you're interested in making one of these stoves, I've posted extensive instructions on my own website, andrewskirka.com, under the backpacking tips and advice section, and I also put together a YouTube video. And these stoves are extremely easy to make, extremely cheap, and they work shockingly well given how simple they are. As far as what I eat on the trail, I have a pretty regimented diet, and the reason for this is because when you're planning for a 7-month-long trip, it's much easier to be regimented about your food when you're planning than it is to just buy huge things in bulk. So I'm a big fan of energy bars, as you can see from this chart that I've posted in this slide. And in the bottom right photo, that was a photo that was taken just before I started through the High Sierra in California. I was going 240 miles very early in the season, and I figured that it was going to take me about 9 days. And what's so nice about this bar diet, and it's not just a bar diet, I also include 3.5 ounces of Pringles and 3.5 ounces of deluxe mixed nuts into that mix, and then I have a dinner that I cook. But what's nice about it is that I can roll into town, pick up my packages at the post office, and very quickly organize all of my food for, say, 9 days. I don't have to repackage everything. It's all self-contained, individual serving sizes, and those individual serving sizes also instill in me some discipline too, because I know when I've eaten 2 bars as my second snack that I can't have a third. I can only eat 2 bars. I can't reach into that gorp bag once more, because I'd essentially be stealing from what I should be eating later in the day. Now in the chart you can see how exactly I eat. I start immediately in the morning with a breakfast of about 650 calories, and then I eat 6 times during the day, spread out by 2 or 2.5 hours. Each snack is about 450 calories, and the reason I like eating like that is because it keeps my energy level very sustained. I'm never eating a meal that is so big that I can't, or that I want to take like a food coma nap. And I'm also never hungry for very long. So maybe immediately, like in the 10 or 15 minutes before snack 2, I start to get hungry, but it's only 10 or 15 minutes. I can wait. As opposed to eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, when 2 or 3 hours before every single meal, I would be getting hungry. And it's very difficult to be out there every single day alone and hungry. That's really tough on your head. For dinner, I would only boil water to make dinner. So things that I can make by boiling water. Dehydrated beans and rice, anything that's been freeze-dried, angel hair pasta, couscous, mashed potatoes are another big favorite of mine. And the total caloric intake comes out to, in this particular chart, it comes out to about 4,400 calories. In reality, it actually probably comes out to more like 5,000 calories, but that still leaves me quite an energy or a caloric deficit as opposed to what I think I'm pumping out every day, of about 6,500 calories, which is about a pound of body mass, and I'm sorry, a half a pound of body mass. So what I end up doing is going into town and trying to make up some of this deficit. It doesn't work perfectly. Some of the meals by the time I'm done are pretty uncomfortable, but I am able to maintain my body weight to a reasonable degree. I typically lose, say, 15, maybe 20 pounds during a hike, but compared to what I'm doing, or in consideration of what I'm doing, that's not that much. As far as medical and emergency issues, this is always a big thing when people look at my first aid kit, which literally consists of duct tape, some Leukotape, crazy glue, and a little penknife, or at least those are really my dedicated first aid things. They just think I'm nuts. But what's so important about first aid is that you're bringing along your head with you. Remember, first aid knowledge or the ability to be resourceful they don't weigh anything. If you're using your brain and you're making good decisions, you're assessing risk properly, you know the sorts of challenges that you're going to be encountering, you're much better off than someone who has this enormous first aid kit but doesn't have a clue what the heck is going on. The other thing in that photo or actually three other things in that photo that I want to point out. The first, the clothing and the shelter guidelines. Those definitely are not traditional first aid items, but if you're resourceful, you could certainly use them as such. An extra piece of clothing, for example, could be used as a bandage. Your shelter guidelines could be used to make a splint, which you could make out of using some trekking poles and some duct tape and the guidelines. So and things like the crazy glue, the duct tape, they have many, many uses. I've used them to repair gear, to protect my skin. I once used duct tape as a guard against frostbite on my nose. The other thing that I want to mention is the Spot Satellite Messenger, which is a fairly new product on the market. I believe it came out in the beginning of 2008 or maybe the end of 2007. What it is, it's a 7-ounce handheld device that contacts low orbiting satellites. And this is a great technology because you have a couple of different options on the device. You can send a message to these satellites that you can just say, hey, I'm here. And it sends up a signal, and the satellite picks up where you are. And the satellite, through this complex communication system, is actually able to send, or that ends up sending an email to people that I choose. So, for example, my mother or my sister or my housemate, and says, hey, Mrs. Skirka, Andrew sent us a signal from his spot unit. He's here. And it includes a link to a Google map with the waypoints. So my mom clicks on the link and can see where in the world I am. And on a trip where I'm in very remote areas, this is a great device. Not just for me, because it could. There are some other features of the unit. For example, I could also send an emergency signal, but it's really a great signal for the folks at home who are worried sick about what I'm doing. And it's also a great way to engage them in what I'm doing as well. For example, in July and August of 2008, I hiked across Iceland, and I was only able to call out once. I was only able to call home once, and it was really neat for my mom and my father to be exploring Iceland over the course of my trip by getting these nightly spot messages. The footwear that I used on the Great Western Loop definitely diverges from what you'd think a backpacker would use. Instead of wearing big, heavy hiking boots, I was wearing a lightweight trail running shoe from Golite. I recommend trail running shoes in general because they're lighter weight, they dry faster, they breathe better, they're definitely more comfortable, and so long as you're carrying a lightweight load, they're also perfectly adequate for backpacking. The feature about the Golite shoes that I think makes it superior to lots of other trail running shoes out there is those soccer cleat-like knobs on the bottom of the shoe. Each one of those knobs has its own polyurethane elastomer. So whenever you step on any sort of abnormality in the trail, be it a stick or a rock or an uneven surface, the shoe itself will absorb some of that abnormality, and that allows me to keep my foot more level, and it also protects my foot from any sort of bruising from blunt objects underneath my foot or that are sticking out on the trail. I wear gaiters as well. I've become a huge fan of gaiters, particularly a model, they're called the Levigators, made by Simblissity, Simblissity. And any of this gear I'll mention too is in my gear lists, which are available on my website, andrewskirka.com. Go into the backpacking advice and tips section and find the gear lists page. Another thing to note is that I don't wear waterproof shoes. I wear non-waterproof shoes because I'm convinced that waterproof shoes are completely worthless in prolonged wet conditions. And when I say wet, that means water. Doesn't mean snow. I think there's actually a good application for waterproof shoes in snow. But when it's raining out or when the ground is wet, I'm sorry, my feet are going to get wet. Rain's going to find a way in, or the water's going to find a way in somehow. It's either going to get in over the tops of my boots, it's going to drip down my legs, it's going to permeate through the seams of the shoe, or if none of that happens, in all likelihood, I'm going to sweat out from the inside. And because this waterproof shoes are not nearly as breathable as just a mesh shoe, they trap all your foot sweat, so you end up getting wet from the inside. Which is a good lead into foot care. Foot care is really important on a long distance hike, and managing moisture is probably the biggest challenge to making sure that your feet stay in good shape. There are a lot of injuries that I can continue hiking with. I can continue hiking with shin splints or with some tendonitis or some pain in my lower back. But if my feet are in tough shape, for example, if I have blisters or my arches are completely collapsing, or if I have cracks, that makes it really, really hard to hike. And thankfully, I've gotten good enough with foot care that I don't have those issues often, if ever, anymore. There are three things that I take with me to treat my feet. The first is an ointment called Hydropel. This ointment, it's consistency of petroleum jelly, and what it is, it strengthens the dermal layers of your skin. And strengthening the dermal layers is really important when your feet get wet. In fact, it's actually preferable to apply it before your feet get wet, because when your feet get wet, that's when they get all pruny, they get white, and what's happening there is that the dermal layers are actually separating from one another. Normally they have these tight bonds between the layers, but when they get wet, those layers start to kind of come apart, and the tissue gets very soft, and it's prone to blistering, it's prone to cracking. By applying Hydropel before my feet get wet, I can keep those dermal layers strong even when my feet do get wet, and that allows me to hike in wet conditions, like sopping wet conditions, for weeks and weeks on end without having huge issues. Another item I take with me for foot care is a tape called Leukotape. This is an excellent skin adhesive, far better than duct tape or athletic tape. It sticks to skin like you wouldn't believe. In fact, I remember one time, in this photo, on the left photo, it's actually a pretty funny photo, but you can see that there's actually some bruising happening in my forefoot. So what I did is I took a piece of Leukotape, actually a couple of pieces of Leukotape, and I applied them to the bottom of my forefoot to just kind of protect that skin and give myself a little bit more cushion there. And I was shocked. It was like 2 weeks later when I was taking a shower. I went to wash the bottom of my foot, and I saw that both of these pieces of Leukotape were still completely stuck to the bottom of my foot. And think about all the pressure that my forefoot takes, and that this tape was able to stick there. That's incredible. The last thing that I take with me for foot care is Crazy Glue. I thankfully very rarely have to use Crazy Glue, but if I get a blister, Crazy Glue is a great way to take care of it. I'll lance the blister, pour in Crazy Glue into the bubble of the blister, push the blister closed on top of the Crazy Glue, making sure to bite a stick or something, because it's definitely is a sharp pain, or it stings rather. It's not a pain, it stings. And then put a piece of Leukotape over that, and I don't have to deal with my blister ever again. Crazy Glue is also very helpful for if I were to get a crack in my foot. For example, again, it doesn't happen very often, but if my foot were to crack, then I can close that crack with Crazy Glue, and I'm not dealing with it ever again. Navigation. A lot of people ask if I take a GPS. They just presume that I do. Or they ask, have you ever gotten lost? And I can't remember the last time that I got lost. I've become very proficient with map and compass. And I don't take a GPS with me. I think they're kind of worthless. Map and compass if you know how to use a map and compass, you're much, much better off. It's a lighter weight system. It's not relying on anything electronic, so it will always work. Paper maps allow me to see more of the landscape around me as opposed to working on this very small LCD screen. And the other thing too is that map and compass, it's such a simple system, and it's perfectly adequate for what I do. It is not critical that I have meter by meter accuracy of my location. That's not important. Now, the reason I say I never get lost is because what I make sure to always be doing is monitoring where I am. And that is the key to avoid getting lost. I'm always looking at my map, I'm looking at my watch, I'm keeping track of trail junctions, road crossings, fords, passes, in order to always be identifying where I am. And that is, if you always know where you are, then you're never lost. It's when people get distracted, be it in conversation or the surroundings, or they don't know how to read a map, and that's when they kind of lose their location and have to re-find themselves. And I've been in that situation before, for sure, before I really got proficient with map and compass. And what's so laughable about that situation is it's so easy to convince yourself that you're somewhere when you're not even close to that particular place. I'm sure that we've all been there before. You look around and see 3 hills, and you look on your map and see 3 hills, and you're like, well, I must be there, even though in reality you should be 3 or 4. You're actually 3 or 4 inches on your map from that particular location. I talked about the planning of my Great Western Loop hike in the normal slideshow, but I'll talk about a couple things right now. So I did a lot of planning for this hike. It's not necessary that you plan a lot for a long distance hike. It's entirely possible to step onto the Appalachian Trail without having looked at a website, without having a map, with having nothing, and just doing it. That particular trail has a lot of infrastructure along the way. There are a lot of hikers out there, and you'll figure it out. But for something like the Great Western Loop, because it was so intense, it required a lot of planning ahead of time. If I hadn't done all the planning, I probably wouldn't have been successful in finishing it. So the planning process for me started at a macro level. I was asking questions like, how long would it take? Where am I going to start? What sort of conditions would I encounter? What direction will I go? What sort of gear will I need? And then as I get closer and closer to my departure date, my planning got ever more specific. My goal in the minute planning was to make sure that I knew as much information as I could, and with the idea being not to take away the element of adventure, but to take away the element of risk. Without a doubt, on a trip like this, there's going to be plenty of adventure. I'm not worried about that. But if I can maximize my likelihood of success by planning properly, then I think that's a good investment of time. And the other thing about doing all the planning for the Great Western Loop was that to hike 33 miles a day for 208 days, I needed to be putting in really long days. And in order to hike long days, I can't be bothered with things like grocery shopping or finding 3 feet of duct tape or buying a new pair of shoes at the store or hitchhiking into town because something broke. Or I don't know. So by doing all that planning ahead of time, I was able to maximize the time I spent on the trail, and that's what allowed me to put in those really long days. I typically don't purify my water. There are plenty of times in which I have, including in this photo here, which was taken on the Coconino Plateau, north of Interstate 40 and south of the Grand Canyon in Arizona. I pulled water out of that stock pond there, and those piles that you see surrounding the shoreline of this stock pond are cow patties, and I think my face says it all. If I do want to purify my water, I'll use liquid Aquamira. Aquamira is a chlorine dioxide treatment. It comes in 2 parts, part A and part B. You take, the directions say mix 7 drops of part A with 7 drops of part B. Let the solutions react for 5 minutes, and once they have reacted for 5 minutes, put them into your water, into 1 liter of water, and wait 15 or 20 minutes, and you have purified water. My experience is that this is the fastest, least expensive, best tasting, lightest weight form of water purification out there. It's far better than a filter, particularly in a group environment, in a group setting, when someone would have to sit there and pump gallons of water. And it's also far better tasting than iodine. In fact, there's no aftertaste with the Aquamira. It's a great treatment, and I highly recommend people moving towards that and away from other conventional sources of water purification. Wildlife encounters are a frequent topic of discussion, particularly with kids. And sure, I've encountered lots of wildlife out there. I haven't seen grizzly bears, black bears, mountain goats, bobcats, moose, and lots of smaller critters like mice and lizards and rattlesnakes and javelinas, coyotes. There are 2 that I've actually never seen. I've never seen a wolf, and I've never seen a mountain lion. I'm sure that mountain lions have seen me, but they've never presented themselves, unfortunately. I'm waiting for the day, and I'm very excited about it. All of my wildlife encounters have been very, very positive. I've had some puckering moments, I think is a good way to say it. Like when you see a grizzly bear pretty close, there's definitely a pucker factor to that one. But in general, I'm comfortable hiking out there because I know proper protocol when I encounter these wildlife. I know how to behave in bear country. For example, in bear country, I always want to be making noise as I'm walking down the trail, because the last thing you want to do is come up on a grizzly bear and surprise it, particularly if it's a sow and cubs. When I'm in black bear country, the biggest issue or the biggest concern is them getting my food. So I'm trying to avoid black bear encounters by not camping where I cook, by not using designated or established campsites, by not carrying really odorous foods, and all the food that I am carrying I'll put in a odor-proof OP sack, which is made by Watchful Eye Designs. And I'll also, depending on where I am in black bear country or grizzly bear country, I'll either hang my food or I'll have my food in a bear canister. I typically will only carry a bear canister if it's, in fact, let me rephrase this. I only carry a bear canister if it's required. And I'm not carrying it because I'm afraid of the black bears. I'm afraid of getting ticketed by a ranger. I'm quite convinced by taking all of the measures that I mentioned before that I'm able to minimize the likelihood of me encountering a black bear to an acceptable level, and I would be okay with just hanging my food. And it's important that you also know how to hang your food as well, but that's kind of a conversation for another day. If you want to look up the appropriate method for hanging your food, you'd be looking, do a Google search for PCT, as in Pacific Crest Trail Method. It involves, it's similar to the counterbalance, but it's more effective than that. All right, the last slide, if you're interested in learning more about lightweight backpacking, a couple of resources that I'll point you to. The first is my website. And of the most helpful things there are all of the gear lists that I have accumulated from my hikes. So every single hike, be that my Appalachian Trail hike or my Sea-to-Sea route hike, or hiking in Tucson in March, or a wilderness trekking course in canyon in southern Utah in September, or the Great Western Loop, all of my gear lists are up there. I encourage you to look at them, learn from them, but please do not follow them exactly, because it's important that you personalize your gear list to your preferences, to the exact conditions that you're going to be encountering, and to your financial budget. And then I've also, on my website, put up a lot of advice and tips about gear and lightweight backpacking techniques. So I've spent a lot of time on my website trying to make it a valuable resource for backpackers, not just a place where I've documented all of my own trips. So please take a look. There are two other websites that I'd highly recommend. Backpacking Light Magazine is an online magazine that has a very active, dedicated, and educated community, and they also have a cast of editors that do excellent gear reviews and talk about trends in the lightweight backpacking. They do podcasts about lightweight backpackers, or they feature expeditions. It's a great website. It's backpackinglight.com. And they also have come out with a book that I would highly recommend. It's called Lightweight Backpacking and Camping. It was edited by Ryan Jordan, and if you're looking for a book form or a print, a thorough, comprehensive piece of paper that talks about lightweight backpacking, that would be where I'd point you to. The other book that's not on this slide is a book called Lighten Up by Don Ladigan, and it's illustrated by Mike Cleland. The last website that I would point you to is GoLight. GoLight's been a longtime sponsor of mine, and they're the ones who really spearheaded the whole lightweight backpacking movement. And really not just lightweight backpacking, but lightening up of all outdoor sports, be that mountaineering or adventure racing, cycling. They've done a great job in making it easier and more comfortable when people go outside. And GoLight's website is golight.com. if you're looking for information on Lightning Up, they have a great segment or a great section on their website called How to Go Light. I believe it's under the About Go Light tab.